This video is a summary of the 4 required practical activities that can be examined in AQA GCSE Chemistry Paper 1. When choosing which topics to prioritise for revision before your GCSE exams, the required practicals should be at the top of your list because you know that they're worth 15% of all of the marks, and that means they're much more likely to come up than any other topic. There are 4 required practicals in Chemistry Paper 1. Firstly, the pure dry soluble salt, then titration, which is only for people taking triple science, then electrolysis of solutions, and finally temperature changes when solutions react. Now, often for the required practicals, we tell you that the first thing that you need to know is about your different variables, independent, dependent, and control. But actually, 2 of these practicals, we tend not really to talk about the variables. So for your pure dry soluble salt, what you really want to concentrate on is, can you write a full and complete method for this practical? For titration, we do talk about the method, but also the variables and also the calculations at the end. For electrolysis, the key thing highlighted in the specification is, can you make predictions about what products we're going to see being made during that electrolysis? And then temperature changes is the real one where we are expecting to see a lot of questions about the different variables in this investigation. The only bit about required practical activity 1 that you can't just put on a flashcard and memorise is which chemicals you're going to use to make your soluble salt. And every year we see tons of students being capped at 4 or even 2 marks for a 6-mark question because they've named the wrong chemicals or they just haven't named them at all. So it's really important that you know how to identify these from the salt that you're trying to make. For the dilute acid, there are only 3 strong acids that you've learnt about in the GCSE. There's hydrochloric acid, nitric acid, and sulfuric acid, and you're going to have to use one of these. Now that might sound complicated, but actually the names of these acids gives you a clue which one you're looking for. So for instance, if you're asked by the question to make some iron sulfate, well, you can see quite clearly that sulfate and sulfuric acid have the same start. And then likewise, if we're asked to make some zinc chloride, that's going to be the hydrochloric acid, because again, we've got that chlor in there. And then if we're asked to make some tin nitrate, well, we would need some nitric acid. So once you understand that this is really a multiple choice piece of information, then it becomes a lot easier. To make that soluble salt, you're going to react the acid that you've just identified with an example of an insoluble metal oxide or metal carbonate. A lot of students end up losing marks because when they're asked to make copper sulfate, they say that they'll add some copper sulfate to the acid. So make sure you are talking about a metal oxide or a metal carbonate. Now, quite often the question will specify that they want you to use a metal oxide or specify that they want you to use a metal carbonate. But if they haven't told you which one to use, then either is fine and you can make that decision for yourself. The first name of the salt is going to give you the first name of the metal oxide or metal carbonate. So for instance, if you're asked to make iron sulfate, then you're going to be using iron oxide or iron carbonate. This is an example of a typical 6-mark question around this first required practical. So we'd identify that for iron nitrate, we'd be wanting to use nitric acid, and since they've just said an insoluble base, that means that we can use either iron oxide or iron carbonate. We need to make sure that we're talking about measuring out the nitric acid and then heating it in order to make that reaction go faster. We would then add an excess of the iron carbonate or the iron oxide. And the reason for this is to make sure that all of the acid has reacted, because they want us to make a pure sample, and it won't be pure if it still has acid on the outside. We'll know that we've added excess base when we can see some solid at the bottom. Now, if you're using iron carbonate rather than iron oxide, you'll also see that it will stop bubbling. But if you're using oxide, there's no bubbling to begin with. So the solid at the bottom of the beaker is usually the best one to go for when you're describing how you know that you've added an excess. Once we've added that excess, we then need to remove it. So at that stage, you're going to filter it. Then we're going to transfer this filtrate to an evaporating basin where it can be very gently warmed until most of the water has evaporated. It's really important at this point that you're not saying that you would do this with a Bunsen burner, because a Bunsen burner is too vigorous of a heat. Finally, we're going to leave this to crystallise and then remove the crystals and dry them. The second required practical is titration, which you only need to know about if you're taking GCSE Chemistry. If you're doing GCSE Combined Science, then you can skip ahead to the next practical. In titration, we're going to start out by measuring out 25 centimetres cubed of a solution. In this example, I've said acid, but in a different question, it might be alkali. You're going to measure that using a volumetric pipette, and you're going to place that acid into the conical flask. We use a conical flask because the sloping sides mean that when you're swirling, you're not going to end up splashing solutions out. Then you're going to add a few drops of indicator. You could choose to name an indicator like phenolphthalein or methyl orange, but just saying indicator would also be sufficient. Then you're going to place that conical flask on a white tile, and this will help you to visualise where the colour change happens. Next, you're going to fill your burette with the other solution. So since in this example I've said that there's acid in the conical flask, there'll be alkali in the burette. We're going to slowly add alkali from the burette to the conical flask. As we do this, we're going to swirl to ensure that the mixture is mixing properly and that everything is homogenised. And near to the end point, we're going to start adding this dropwise, in other words, a drop at a time, to make sure that we don't overshoot. We're going to stop adding the alkali when we see the first permanent colour change, and then crucially, we're going to record the volume that's been added. It's really easy to miss this step and end up with a method that cannot be awarded 6 marks. You might also want to include some additional further details, like how you would rinse the sides of the conical flask with a wash bottle to make sure that all of the solution had gone down into that reaction, or how when you're reading off volumes, you would be measuring from the bottom of the meniscus with that at eye level. In titration calculations, there are 3 key steps. Firstly, we're going to calculate the moles of the substance that we have 2 pieces of information about. Then we're going to use the coefficients in the symbol equation to calculate the moles of the unknown substance, and then we're going to use that together with the volume to calculate the concentration of that unknown substance. So in this example, I have 2 pieces of information about strontium hydroxide. So to work out the moles, I'm going to multiply together the concentration and the volume. But of course that volume needs to be in decimeters cubed before I can do the calculation. So I multiply 0.1 by 0.0225 and I get 0.00225. Then I'm going to look at the coefficients in my symbol equation, and I can see that I need twice as many moles of nitric acid as I have strontium hydroxide. So therefore, in this instance, I'm going to double this. Then I'm going to take this together with the 25 centimetres cubed of nitric acid to work out the concentration of that final solution. So I do 0.0045 divided by 0.025 because of course that one needs to be in decimeters cubed as well, and I get a final concentration of 0.18 moles per decimeter cubed. Most of the information about electrolysis in the specification is not to do with the required practical, but if we think just about that required practical, we're specifically focusing on aqueous solutions. So what we mean by an aqueous solution is that we're going to take a substance like sodium chloride, which contains sodium ions and chloride ions, but we're going to dissolve it in water, and that means our electrolyte will also include hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions. So when the current is running and we have electrical charge building up, we're going to see that the positively charged cations move to the negative cathode and the negatively charged anions move to the positive anode. But only one of each of those types of ion is going to discharge, and therefore only one of them is going to make a product. So we've got some rules that we need to know. Our first rule applies to the cations and the cathode. So the least reactive cation, in other words the least reactive positive ion, is the one that's going to discharge and therefore make our product. So that means that if we're thinking about an aqueous solution where an electrolyte is made up of water and a substance dissolved in it, then we're going to make one out of copper, silver, gold, platinum or hydrogen. And the reason for that is that those 4 metals are all less reactive than hydrogen, so an electrolyte containing them will make those jewellery metal products. But an electrolyte that contains any other metal like iron or tin or aluminium wouldn't make those metals, and instead it's the hydrogen that discharges. Then if we think about our anions and our anode, we're going to see that hydroxide ions discharge to make oxygen at that positive anode, unless we have a halide ion present. So in this example, where we have a chloride ion, that chloride ion would be what's discharging and we would make chlorine. This is a really good example where they could also ask you to link it together with gas tests. Since it's in paper 1, they would probably need to give you a little reminder of those, but the idea that if we had chlorine being produced, it would bleach litmus paper. If we had oxygen being produced, it would relight a glowing splint. And if we had hydrogen being produced, then we could ignite it and it would burn rapidly with a squeaky pop. This final required practical in Chemistry Paper 1 is the one where we're really likely to get into identifying variables, and it's a really nice opportunity for the exam board to do this because it's not just one practical that you always approach in the same way. So the overall brief is that we're investigating the variables that affect temperature changes in reacting solutions. So that could be a neutralization reaction where we add together an acid and an alkali. It could be a displacement reaction where we add metals to copper sulfate. There are lots of different examples of reactions that could come under this umbrella. But the one thing that we do know is that we're measuring temperature changes. So those temperature changes are going to be our dependent variable. And if we're writing a method, we're going to need to explain that we're measuring the start temperature and the end temperature to allow us to calculate a temperature change. Now, in terms of the independent variable, this is going to vary from question to question. So you need to make sure you're reading it carefully and identifying what has changed in each experiment. So this could be something like the mass of metal that's added to an acid or a sulfate solution. It could also be the type of metal that's being added. Or it could be something like the concentration of a solution. One thing to note here, we often see students talking about an acid when actually the question isn't about an acid. So solution is a really good word to have in your vocabulary because it's true if it's an acid, but it's also true if you're talking about something like copper sulfate or iron chloride. Then the control variables, again, can vary quite a bit because it's going to depend on what the exact investigation you're looking at. But one thing to bear in mind is that if you're talking about how much of a solution you have, which is extremely likely to be one of the control variables, you want to be using the word volume. Lots of people default to using the word amount, and of course amount has a specific meaning in chemistry, and particularly in this practical it's often not appropriate. So make sure you're using the word volume. Another thing that we see a lot of the time is people talking about controlling the temperature because that's very often a control variable in reactions. But of course here we're trying to measure a change in temperature. But the one thing you can do is talk about controlling the starting temperature. So you might want to make sure that all of your solutions are at 20 degrees C before you begin the investigation. Here's an example of a typical exam question about this required practical. Since we're told that different metals are reacting with hydrochloric acid, that's our clue that this is the independent variable. And then we're looking at the impact on temperature change, so that's our dependent variable. And our control variables need to be anything else that could affect the temperature change that we don't want to include in the investigation. So this could be things like the volume of the acid, the concentration of the acid, and the mass of the metal added. In order to score 5 or 6 marks on a 6-mark method question about a required practical, your method has to be complete and would produce valid data. In other words, it would allow you to answer the question if you carried out the investigation. So firstly, let's look at what the absolutely crucial pieces of information are, and then we'll fill in some of the gaps around them. The first thing is that we need to actually add the metal to the acid, otherwise we don't have any reaction at all. And you would be very surprised how many people manage to miss out this step. We're interested in temperature changes, so we definitely need to be measuring the highest temperature reached, which would allow us to estimate what the biggest temperature change is. But if we're actually going to do this properly, we also need to measure a starting temperature. Now, wherever possible, you want to be identifying what equipment you're using in the experiment, even if it seems really obvious. So I'd include here that we're measuring this using a thermometer. So once we've got those starting and ending temperatures, we can use those together to calculate a temperature change. So right now, all I know is that if I add some magnesium to some acid, it gets hot. But what I'm interested in is what happens when different metals are added. So of course, I now need to repeat this experiment with a different metal. And here I've included that it's going to be the same mass of a different metal. So I'm automatically including that idea that the mass needs to be controlled. So let's think about some other control variables. Well, I want to control the volume of the acid and also the concentration of the acid. And the easiest way to get this information across to my examiner without writing a full sentence saying, when you repeat it, make sure that you use the same volume and make sure that you use the same concentration, is just to state a volume and a concentration. And you don't have to have a specific number. You know, we would still give you credit if you said 20 or if you said 30, as long as you weren't saying a wildly inappropriate volume of acid like a litre or something. And again, we want to mention our equipment. So here we would measure this out using a measuring cylinder. We would then do this reaction in an insulated cup that has a lid. So we know that polystyrene is a much better insulator than glass, and therefore less heat energy would be escaping to the surroundings. We can also measure, we can also mention that we're going to measure the mass of this metal. So we've said 0.5 grams here, and we've mentioned that we're adding it to the hydrochloric acid. We could also talk about stirring this, because this is going to make sure that we have a homogeneous reaction mixture, and it's going to make our data a bit more valid. And also we could talk about measuring this repeatedly for each metal, which would allow us to calculate a mean temperature change and thereby reduce the impact of any random error. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope you're now feeling a little bit more confident about these Chemistry Paper 1 required practicals. If you did find this video useful, then don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share the channel, and I'll be back soon with some more GCSE Science revision.